morning. Oh, yeah. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm here with Dr. Jeremy McAnulty to update the community in regard to the Bondi Westfield cluster. I want to start by thanking the community. Up until 8 p.m. last night, we had 26,631 tests. It's obviously a reasonable number, but nowhere near what we'd like to see. So I want to emphasise that the weapon that we have to defeat this virus, and it keeps coming back, is making sure you get tested. Making sure you get tested and making sure you use the QR codes when you enter any of our indoor facilities. I want to recap on what we've had in the last few days and then make mention of two further cases. So we know we had the 60-year-old gentleman who was a limousine driver who had onset of symptoms at around about the 13th of June. And as many of you will be aware, most of you will be aware as you've been at these conferences before, the normal period we would consider as a likely infectious period is the 2 days before, so that's on the 11th and 12th before symptom onset. What we believe at the present time is that there were transmissions that occurred on the 12th and 13th of June in or around the retail area of Westfield Bondi. But there was the first case was obviously the transmission to his wife, which we've talked about previously. The second transmission was a woman in her 70s at the Bell Cafe at Vaucluse. And you might recollect that she was actually outside the cafe at a table outside, and this gentleman was inside, but the evolving situation would indicate that there must have been a crossover at some point. We don't know, obviously, because there's no CCTV camera in that regard, but there obviously was a crossover because the lady became infected with the Delta strain of this virus. We announced yesterday the third case was a man in his 50s in a part of Myers at Westfield Bondi. What I would stress in relation to that case is we've had access to the CCTV cameras, and that's been closely looked at. The gentleman that became infectious, the gentleman in his 50s, was no more than seconds in the near vicinity of the limousine driver, the original case, and looking at it, it would appear that he was somewhere in the range of between 10 and possibly 50 to 60 centimetres away in a passing situation. Each of them had stood not far away from each other for a very short period of time, and then it would appear that one of them possibly moved through the airspace that the other one had occupied. That is becoming a fairly accepted situation now, that this is the type of a crossover event that can occur. It's fair to say that this Delta virus would appear to be a near and present danger to anybody who is in the vicinity. So when we look at the other cases, a new case which was not announced yesterday, it came in late yesterday, early evening, is a woman in her 40s who lives in the Bondi Junction area and walks regularly through the Westfield shopping centre. We don't know as yet what day is the likely transmission, but as she walks through there on most days, or many days, it could well be the 12th or the 13th, which is when the other transmissions occurred. Another case that came in late last night, and most of you would know we have a formal cut-off at 8 p.m. for the numbers, this particular case will appear in tomorrow's numbers, but it was a gentleman in his 30s who lives in the Sydney CBD, but he also visited the Westfield at Bondi, Bondi Junction. He visited his physician and had a test which came back positive, and that gentleman was in the Illawarra. He had gone for a visit down to the Illawarra. He dropped into a cafe called the Broken Drum Cafe yesterday morning between 10:20 and 10:40. So we're certainly asking people to who are in that vicinity of that facility to get tested, and I'll ask in a moment Dr. McAnulty to talk more about the testing arrangements. I stress that if you're in that cafe and you put in your QR code, you obviously will be contacted by health, but if you overlooked using your QR code, then please contact health and let us know that you were there, and you'll be given advice on what you should be doing. The issue that has become apparent in the course of the last few days is that this particular Delta virus is a near and present danger. It's a virus that is very capable of transmitting even when we have very fleeting proximity between the individual who is infectious and any of us who might be passing by. So my very strong message to the community is, if you have been in or around the Westfield shopping centre, you have to understand that it's not just Myers, it's not just David Jones. It's the concern we have is that even if you happen to be passing the person who is infectious, for example, on an escalator, walking along a passageway, going through the airspace where the person has breathed out, we could see you becoming positive. So I'm going to ask Dr. McAnulty to indicate clearly what we'd like people in that situation to do. It's a little different from what we have normally been asking people to do. And then after Dr. McAnulty has addressed that, and any other matters that he'd like to address, we will then, of course, take questions. Dr. McAnulty.
Thank you very much, Minister. Good morning. We are asking people to be very vigilant about checking regularly the New South Wales Health website, because information is regularly updated about what you need to do if you've been to any contact venues. Now, we've got an increasing number of venues where infectious cases have attended, and we've got advice about getting tested and isolating, and how long you need to be isolated for. Where, in addition to that regular routine advice we give for any case, we're particularly concerned about Westfield Bondi Junction. We've got additional advice about testing if you were there when we know there was transmission on the 12th and the 13th of June. So if you have any symptoms, you need to get tested and isolate until you get a negative result. If you've been to any contact venues, you need to follow the advice about isolating and testing. In addition, if you've been to Westfield Bondi Junction on Saturday the 12th of June between 11 a.m. and 12 noon, and Sunday the 13th of June between 1 p.m. and 2 p.m, or between 4 p.m. and 4:30 p.m, we ask that you get tested. While you don't have to strictly isolate, we ask that you minimise your exposure to other people until you get a negative test. That means wearing a mask if you're out, working from home if you can, but minimising. Don't go to gatherings, don't go to places where there are crowds, such as the ski fields. We want to take a very precautious approach to this evolving situation and get on top of it, so that we're asking everyone's cooperation in the community to get tested, to isolate, to minimise exposure to other people, even if you haven't been at one of those specific venues we've identified. Thanks very much.
Happy to take any questions. Can I also just mention too that there was some excitement in the media, which is not unusual, about a possible case on the northern beaches yesterday. I saw some media reports about that. Can I just indicate that there is no positive case on the northern beaches? In the usual course, the investigations were taking place, but no positive case on the northern beaches.
Minister, should
Liz.
masks be mandated in indoor areas given the transmission in the shopping centre? I mean, we're not seeing transmission on public transport, we're seeing it in the shopping centre.
Yeah, look, at the moment, the health advice is that it's wise to wear them indoors, but obviously we've mandated it as from 4 p.m. yesterday on public transport in the Sydney region. We will be and are constantly keeping, as we have always, any unfolding information and weighing it up as to what the risk factors are. But I think at this stage, the health advice is that it's strongly recommended, not mandatory at this point. And we'll, as I said, we'll consider that if we need to.
Perhaps this is a better question, I mean, it's a pretty extraordinary number of people, probably at the Westfields, that you're asking to get tested. Do you have a sense of numbers as to how many people?
Look, obviously there could be thousands of people, hopefully, in the Westfield shopping centre over those times. And we are asking, normally we ask, of course, if you have any symptoms to go and get tested or you've been to specific venues. But what we're saying is this virus appears to be such a near and present danger to almost anybody in the vicinity that it's wise, if you're there on those days, to go and get tested. Now, we're not being overly prescriptive or restrictive at this stage. I think you'd have to say that New South Wales has always struck the balance of trying to make sure that the risk profile is correctly assessed and not placing too many restrictions on our residents. But the worry with this virus is that when we're interviewing people, and you can imagine, I'm sure those who are listening would reflect on this, that if you know you've gone to a particular shop, well, that's good, but you may well have completely forgotten how you got there, where you parked, which car park, which escalators you went up. I know I regularly do that. Struggle to find the car sometimes, but anyway. So I think it's a case of just being extra cautious. If you've actually been in the general vicinity of that period, on those days, at those times, we're asking you to just go and get tested. We're not asking you to isolate at this stage, but certainly to go and get tested.
26,000 tests.
Sorry, I'll just do Chris first and then come back to you.
26,000 tests. You're not happy with that. Where would you like to see it doubled?
26,000 tests when we have such a potent virus doing its best to spread itself is not great. We would much rather see it up in the 40s and 50s. I'll never forget the fact that when we had a super spreading event down, not that this is a super spreading event at this stage, a super spreading event on the northern beaches, we were getting up to 70,000 a day. So we know people are capable of doing it. We're just asking our community and reminding them that we have testing facilities there. We would love you to get out and get tested. A bit hard to put an actual number, a precise number on it, Chris, but certainly we'd be feeling more comfortable if we were up in the 40s and 50s.
Are you considering locking down the eastern suburbs at all, like we saw with the northern beaches?
No, not at this stage. It's being managed, I think, carefully with the appropriate risk profile issues being considered. I think the community just need to be on high alert in the eastern suburbs, particularly. As the Premier and I said yesterday, it might be wise for people to minimise their movement around at the present time in the eastern suburbs. And if you do have to go to the shops, you want to go to the shops, just very wise to wear a mask in there at the present time.
Have we learned any more about the limo driver in terms of that police investigation into his?
I don't think you were here yesterday, Liz, but what we were saying yesterday was that there was a police officer with us yesterday, and he said they're undertaking the investigation. But from the health perspective, our main interest is making sure that everybody who is put in this situation or finds themselves in this situation shares in a full and frank way with us all the information they can. So from a health perspective, I can say that the limousine driver has been extremely helpful, as was mentioned, I think, yesterday. or at some stage, that he's provided a photograph of himself, which has been very good. It provides our tracing staff greater power to be able to look at the various videos and see exactly what he looks like. That's how they found him in the videos. So he's being very cooperative and very helpful, which is what we actually need to make sure that we manage a pandemic. Sorry, I go with you.
Yesterday afternoon, the limousine car park at Sydney International Airport is listed as one of the exposed venues. Is there a risk other drivers were exposed to the virus?
There's been no indication at all at this stage, but obviously anybody who may have been in the vicinity of this particular person during his infectious period, which is the period I said at the outset. Sorry, can I just finish? Thank you. Anybody in that situation should go and get tested. If there are other people who know that they've been near the driver, my strong recommendation would be go and tested. Sorry.
What changes to the vaccine rollout will New South Wales push for on Monday at National Cabinet?
National Cabinet is obviously for the leaders, and the Premier will be there. And as I understand it, the Prime Minister will be making announcements as to what the federal government is proposing in regard to the vaccine rollouts, off the back of the changes in the recommended age groups for the AstraZeneca. Beyond that, I don't think there's any clarity yet what is going to occur on that front, but clearly, as the Premier has said, and as I've said many times, we would like as much vaccine as possible to come to New South Wales, indeed the whole of Australia. We want the whole of Australia kept safe, but that's challenging for the federal government because obviously they have contract supply issues. There's not an unlimited amount of vaccine. It's coming in regular amounts, but not unlimited. And so that does influence the decision making that we have in regard to how we roll the vaccines out.
This retreat on AstraZeneca.
Sorry, Chris, I'll just finish here and then come back to you. Yep.
Does the decision to make vaccinations mandatory for quarantine workers rest with the states or National Cabinet?
We can effectively put in those requirements, but it's been discussed at National Cabinet and generally it's been followed as a guidance from National Cabinet. But as I said, the issue for us here in New South Wales, every state and territory are a little bit different. We have the single biggest need for staff because we bring in the biggest number of people on behalf of Australia by far since the outbreak of the pandemic. We have brought in over 190,000 people, many of those who are residents of other states and territories, on any one day to run our massive quarantine system, our hotel quarantine system. We have in the order of about 6,500 staff, and those staff obviously turn over from time to time. One of the issues is that there will always be some people who might come in on a particular day who somehow have managed to miss it. Maybe they were off sick, maybe they were off on holidays, but we're doing everything we can. It's a human system. I've said this hundreds of times, a human system, and we try to make sure that everybody is vaccinated. Chris.
Minister, this black mark or new black mark against AstraZeneca, just how unhelpful is that now in terms of your current battle with this outbreak?
Look, I think obviously the fact that the AstraZeneca has now been limited to the age brackets of over 60 does place particular challenges on each of the state governments in the rollout of the vaccine in our responsibilities. It also places obligations or challenges for the federal government. Let's keep in mind that the federal government is primarily responsible for the rollout of the vaccines through the GP network, and we were originally going to just do the New South Wales government normal responsibilities, so around quarantine workers, health workers and so on. But we've stepped up and we're helping in a number of other areas that were the federal government responsibility. But it's a shared burden that some of the limitations of AstraZeneca are imposing on both governments, all governments, and I think it does make it more challenging to get the vaccine out. But I would strongly say to people that the fact that there was an outbreak in Victoria recently, the fact that we've had a number of cases, not a whole lot at this point, but we're concerned obviously about the cases from Bondi. It just reminds us again, as I've said many times, the airport is the gateway to the world, and so we have to expect from time to time in a human system that this virus, it's a pretty cunning virus, it knows how to get where it wants to go, we need to understand that the only answer for that one is to get vaccinated. So my strong advice to people over the age of 60 is to follow the expert advice. The expert advisory group who've advised the federal government to now restrict it to over 60s. If you've already had your first vaccine, go and have your second. I've had both, and I tell you what, it's a feeling of freedom when you've had it. Your risk factors go down dramatically, so I would strongly encourage people to go and have it. The risk factors for the over 60s are certainly outweighed. The very small risk factor, associated with having the vaccine is nothing compared to the risk factor if the virus gets hold in and around our state or Australia.
If people under 60 want AstraZeneca, would they be committed to?
Look, those are matters that would be discussed with their GP. There might be individual circumstances, but generally people should be following, and the GPs would normally exercise professional judgment, which would be in accord with the ATAGI or the expert advice that the federal government has received on this issue.
On quarantine,
Chris.
Can I ask you about an incident at the Meriton Suites at Zeppelin on Thursday night, late Thursday night, when a fire alarm erupted, and as we understand it, a large number of people left their rooms into hallways, milling together, and may well have been COVID positive people amongst them. It led to a floor of the building being evacuated completely.
But, sorry, Chris, was that a police hotel or it's a police hotel?
No, it's not a police hotel, as I understand it.
Look, I haven't been briefed on it, so I don't think there's any particular concern from the health authorities in regard to that. But you know what? Again, these issues happen, and I have absolute confidence in the police and the health staff that manage these hotels. They do their best, and I'm quite sure they would have managed it appropriately.
You expect in those circumstances that people would have to restart their 14 days if they're all milling together in hallways?
I think you're supposing and getting ahead of the issues. Health has not raised that as an issue with me, so I'm going to accept that at the moment there are from time to time these issues that arise in our system, but there's been no particular issues raised with me that suggest that we have any concerns.
Minister, what's your advice for residents of the eastern suburbs attending large gatherings? If I'm a Bondi resident, I've got tickets to a concert tonight, am I still allowed to go, or should I stay home?
Obviously, residents, if you've been in the vicinity of the Westfield Bondi, it would be helpful, as we've suggested, if you have your test and make sure that you've actually got a negative result before you do anything else. That's the information or the advice we're giving. But our broader advice is that people should exercise caution, maintain as far as possible social distancing, and definitely wear masks. So if you're going to a concert tonight, that's great, but wear a mask, keep your social distance as far as you can. But if you can, and if you're over that way, go and get a test beforehand.
But Minister, given the fact you've got only 26,000 tests, it's clear indication that there's a big difference between asking people and requiring people. And that's, you're hesitating before you get to that point, aren't you?
I'm sorry, Chris, you're saying what?
I'm saying to you, there's only 26,000 tests, that's half of what you'd like, which demonstrates there's a big difference between requiring people and asking people. At the moment, you're just asking people.
Look, I've been the health minister for 16 months in a pandemic, and I think the one thing I've learned is that health advice is good advice, and we act on health advice, and so far we've managed to do that because the community have been on board with us. And I'm quite sure that if we needed to change that situation, we would take the advice and do it appropriately. But I'm not going to jump the gun. I'll leave that to other jurisdictions, other premiers and other states, but not here in New South Wales. Lizzie, last question.
The two cases, the two new cases, have you been able to pin down points of transmission? Did they catch it from the 60-year-old limo driver, or is there other spreaders walking around we don't know about?
Well, the assumption obviously is at this stage that they've got it from the limo driver because he was there in the infectious phase and everybody seems to have been coming from that source. So that's what we believe to be the case at this point. All right, thanks so much. Is it a really good one?
Yeah.
Okay, it's a really good one. All right.
Do you agree with the PM that it will be at least 6 months before we can open international borders?
Well, he's the Prime Minister, so I'll leave that one to the Prime Minister. What I will say is, as we've said many times, as the Premier and I have said many times here in New South Wales, we really do need people to get vaccinated and to get up to close to herd immunity in order for us to be sufficiently safe to open our borders. And if the PM is saying 6 months, he obviously thinks that we'll be able to achieve that, and he would have more information about vaccine supplies. But I can tell you that we'll take whatever vaccine supply we can get in New South Wales from the federal government, and we'll get it out as fast as possible, and hopefully they will do the same through GPs. And at that point, I'm sure the borders will then be considered to be soon opened. Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you. A cold morning. Thank you.